This happened 15 years ago, just before I celebrated my 16th birthday. For that special moment, my family organized a big reunion in South Carolina. Since I hadn't been there since I was a little girl, my parents thought it would be a great way to enjoy my summer vacation and also meet my cousins and spend time with them. I had cousins, and they were all about the same age as me, between 14 and 16. After some thought, I decided it sounded like fun, so we flew down there the following month. The reunion was at the hotel where we were staying. Upon arrival, my cousins Clara, Lila, and Zoe greeted me with much excitement. I was also very excited to see them and finally meet them. It was amazing to see how many things we had in common, all with long blonde hair and blue eyes. I could tell that the only big difference between us was their tans. They had spent the spring in the sun, while I had been cooped up in Minnesota the whole time. My dad and her dad decided that they would let the four of us sleep in one room together. This was a spacious suite and pretty cool. My cousins and I were very excited, and when we saw it, we got to make a joke and say we were the bridesmaids at a bachelorette party. You know, girl stuff. They chose me as the bride because I was the oldest and I looked a little different, like a big sister, and it was really fun. We spent the whole day at the pool, talking and flirting with some boys. Zoe, who was only 14, managed to make a 24-year-old boy think she was 19 and even gave him her number. That was too funny, and we laughed so much about it that night we stayed up until 4 in the morning. In the morning, already around noon, we ordered breakfast and then went back to the pool just as we had done the day before. But this day was even better, as Zoe, again posing as someone older, managed to get a pair of twins to buy us lunch. She was definitely on fire that week. Later that night, we dressed up and had dinner at the hotel restaurant with our parents, but by this time, our story had taken on a life of its own. My cousins had been telling the guys all day that we were there for a big party and asking them to buy us drinks, although most realized they were just kidding. After dinner, we ran into a couple of older guys in the lobby. They had seen us leaving the restaurant and invited us to join them, and since we had nothing better to do, we gladly accepted. When we sat down, they started asking us about our ages and names, and of course we lied and said we were in our early 20s. They ate it up, and we couldn't stop laughing at the whole thing. That was, without a doubt, the funniest thing I had done in years. Clara and I didn't say much, so Belinda and Zoe took the lead on everything. At one point, Zoe proposed inviting the guys to our room, but I pulled her aside and reminded her that her dad was staying right next door and probably wouldn't take it well. I didn't want to be the spoilsport, but I didn't feel comfortable with two older guys, like 30, in our room. That was already crossing the line, but it seemed like my little cousin was starting to believe her own lie that she was 20. As midnight approached, I told the girls it was time to go back to our suite. They resisted at first, but once Clara backed me up, they relented, so we told the guys that they would meet us at the pool around 11 a.m. for lunch together. Then we went back to our room and stayed up late talking, planning what we were going to do when we saw them in the morning. That continued until 2 a.m. or so, when we decided it was finally time for bed. The lights went out, but just then we started to hear strange noises at the door, as if someone was trying to get in. It sounded like someone was moving the doorknob to open the door. At first I thought I was imagining things, but when the noise came back, I started to get nervous. I asked the girls if they had heard that, and they confirmed that they had. Then, without a second thought, Lila got up and decided she would go over to see who it was. I yelled for her to stop before she opened the door, but it was too late, so Clara turned on the lights while I watched Lila intently. She opened the door and then turned her head towards us, saying that there was no one there. However, when she took a step into the hallway, she found herself face to face with a man dressed in black with a white mask on. Everything happened too fast, and before we could react, we saw how the man grabbed Lila, covered her mouth, and she disappeared from our sight. At that same instant, Zoe, Clara, and I ran out into the hallway and arrived just in time to see Lila struggling with the man in the mask as he dragged her into one of the nearby rooms. Seeing this, my cousins and I started screaming as we ran towards the man, trying to get him to release Lila. She struggled with all her might but could not break free. Fortunately, my uncle and dad came out of their rooms when they heard the commotion and realized what was happening. Seeing himself discovered, the man immediately let go of Lila and ran down the hallway, but my uncle caught up with him and lunged at him, hitting him again and again. However, after punching him several times in the face, the guy let go and ran down the hallway again, disappearing down the stairs. While my uncle and dad were trying to catch the guy, my cousins and I ran to Lila to see if she was okay. She was scared and obviously very traumatized, but luckily didn't seem to be hurt. After losing the guy, Dad and my uncle came over to where we were again to make sure Lila was okay, and after confirming that she was, they called hotel security to tell them what had happened. They quickly notified the police, and we returned to our room. Once inside our suite, the four of us sat together hugging and crying, relieved that Lila was safe. Although the hotel tried to secure the doors to catch the attacker, by the time the police arrived, he had already escaped. We tried to describe the assailant, but he was all in black and wearing a mask, so we didn't have much to offer. The only thing we were sure of was that the guy who attacked Lila was a man, but that was all we knew. During the rest of the week, we talked to the police several times, telling them what we had been doing those days. When our parents found out about our prank about being in town for a bachelorette party, and that we had been lying to older boys about our ages, they were pretty upset. The police explained that one of those boys had probably been the one who grabbed Lila. They thought maybe they were trying to kidnap one of us and sell her to a dealer since we looked alike. He said that this person probably wasn't acting alone, and that maybe he thought the victim was alone in that room because if he had known there were several of us, maybe they would have used another method. That made us think of the first guy Zoe had talked to. It is possible that this guy had followed her and saw her enter the room, since that morning she went upstairs to change after staining her dress with ice cream. My cousins and I were terrified after that, so we spent the rest of the week locked in our room, not opening the door to anyone we didn't know. As soon as the police gave us the go-ahead to go home, we didn't even wait a day. My parents took the first flight back to Minnesota. I was still afraid of strangers for quite a while and had to go to therapy to get over what I had experienced. My cousins also went through the same thing and had a hard time trusting kids they had just met. Unfortunately, the police were never able to track down the guy who attacked Lila and make him pay for what he did. It all started when I woke up to the sound of someone banging on my apartment door. It was a real scare and my heart was racing as I grabbed the baseball bat I had stashed under my bed and approached the door, ready to defend myself. The first thing I did was look through the peephole naturally to see if there was anyone weird out there. But that's when I run into one of my neighbors, who looked pale and was covered in blood. Her face was a mess and I was shocked to see her in that state. I immediately opened the door and she came running in, screaming that I had to get her out of there because her boyfriend wanted to kill her. I started asking her questions, but she just kept telling me that there was no time and to please help her, that if I didn't hurry, he would be able to kill me just for trying to help her. Logically, that made me panic because if a guy is willing to hit his girlfriend like that, I don't even want to imagine what he would do to me. So I immediately ran to the kitchen counter, grabbed my car keys that were there, and ran out to the garage with her close on my heels. It took me a split second to get to my garage, and once there I jumped in my car and shot out onto the road. As I drove, I asked my neighbor if she had anywhere to go. Maybe friends or family who could take her in, but she said no. So I decided the best thing to do was to take her to a motel and call the police from there. She agreed, and so we did. We arrived at the motel. I booked a room, and upon seeing her condition, the receptionist was as concerned as I was. I quickly explained that her boyfriend had tried to hurt her, and as soon as she heard that, she was shocked. She told me that we should call the police immediately. The girl, whose name I didn't know at the time, asked me to get her some ice from the machine to calm the swelling on her face, and asked for my phone number to call the police. When I got to the room, she told me that she had already made the call, and it gave me some relief to know that the police would be coming soon. She also seemed a little relieved to know that the police would soon come and she could report her attacker, but as soon as she put the ice on her face, she suddenly burst into tears. It really broke my heart to see her in that state. I did my best to comfort her, telling her that she was safe and that everything was going to be okay, but she wouldn't stop crying. When she finally calmed down, I asked her what had really happened in her apartment. Then she told me that her boyfriend was an abuser and that she'd been planning to leave him for a while. That night, she decided it was time to let him know, but then he found her packing, and as expected, everything turned into chaos. She seemed very shocked, and in the midst of the tension, I saw her start pouring herself drinks from a bottle of liquor that was in a minibar that was in the room, promising me that she would pay me back when this was all over. I had no reason to doubt what he was saying. The truth is that at that moment I felt that we had created some sort of connection, but I decided to keep my distance, thinking that she would be back at her apartment in a jiffy. I asked her if I could wait alone while the police arrived, but she asked me to stay with her, pointing out that if her boyfriend saw the blood on my apartment door, he would know she had been there and would probably come looking for me or worse, hurt me. Truth be told, her point made sense. Even though she hadn't seen the blood on my door, her condition was so obvious that I believed her. About an hour passed, and the police still didn't show up. The motel rooms were arranged in a circle, so if they had entered the parking lot, we would have been able to see them. I asked her to call the police again to find out what was going on because this was a clear emergency. And even though I thought there was no way her boyfriend could find us, I still felt quite uneasy. That's when she started giving me vague answers like, "Don't worry, I'm sure they'll be here soon." That is, if I had been her, I would have dialed 911 again if they didn't arrive in 10 minutes. Seeing that they didn't show up, I decided to stop worrying about it and stayed for a drink. I had nowhere to go, and honestly, I couldn't go back to my apartment with that guy potentially lurking just a few steps away. In the meantime, I began to notice more of the amount of blood on her nightgown. She was wearing a giant t-shirt and underwear, and as I mentioned, they were soaked in blood, in addition to the splatter everywhere. She had a small cut above her eye and a swollen lip, but it seemed to me that there was too much blood for those simple wounds. So I asked her if she had more injuries. Maybe something on her abdomen that would explain all that spillage, but she assured me no. That all she had was the busted lip and the cut above her eye. That left me a little skeptical. At that point, I asked her again what had really happened in her apartment, and she suddenly became defensive. I began to think that perhaps her story of being a victim of an abuser was not as clear as she had first told me. For that reason, I was getting a little nervous waiting for the police to arrive, so I decided it was time to call them back. All I had with me was my purse, phone, and car keys, the only things I managed to stuff in my shorts before running out of the apartment. But when I pulled out the phone to call, she looked at me with a quizzical expression and said, "What are you doing?" I replied that I was about to redial the police, and she just looked at me and said, "No need, they'll be here any minute." The atmosphere changed drastically when I told her I was going to call the police again. I could tell she got nervous and looked scared. I asked her what was wrong, but got no answer, so I decided to call 911. When the operator answered, I looked up, and then almost fell over with shock. She had a knife in her hand and with an almost devilish expression ordered me to hang up. I can't begin to explain how terrifying that was, and not just because of the knife, but because of that chilling feeling of realizing that I wasn't running from a threat. She was the threat. Honestly, I begged her not to hurt me, and to my surprise, she said she wouldn't as long as I got her to the Canadian border, which wasn't too far from where we were. But let's be honest, I didn't want to be an accomplice to anything, and I knew I had to think fast to get out of this situation unscathed. Not that I thought I could tell the police that she had threatened me or anything, but the more time I spent at her side, the more likely it became that she would stab me or assault me in some way. So I told her what she wanted to hear, assured her that I would take her to the border, but told her that we should make a stop to get something to eat, as I was too hungry and I assumed she must be too. In my mind, I thought I could convince her to stop at a 24-hour place or something. She agreed, but made it clear to me that she would be the one to go down to get the food because I didn't want her to have a chance to warn anyone. But that's where she made a mistake, because I just told her that we could order food by delivery service and up to the motel door. Then I took the opportunity to include a note about the need for the police to come to the motel. It all depended on whether there was a driver available at that time, but luckily there was. She asked me to show her the request and I showed it to her, but I managed to cover up the part where I included the note with my finger. She nodded and we stood waiting. The policemen arrived without sirens or lights on. They walked up to the motel room, unnoticed, and knocked on the door as if they were delivery boys, but when she approached and opened the door, boom! They pulled a gun and taser on her before she could react. Turns out she had the knife hidden in her pants, but the cops acted fast and she fell to the ground. And here's where the craziness comes in. They were looking for this broad because, surprise, surprise, she was the abuser who had stabbed her boyfriend to within an inch of his life before coming to my door and appealing to my goodwill, and then forcing me to take her to Canada. I also learned that the boy, after receiving the beating, managed to crawl to a neighbor's house to call for help. The scene in the hallway of my building was a mess. There were a lot of police and forensics everywhere. I considered going to a friend's house for the night, because the cops were blocking the hallway where I lived. That morning they came to take my statement and explain what had really happened. The feeling was so surreal and terrifying that I still find it hard to believe that I was in the middle of it all. What strikes me most is how I swallowed their story without any hesitation whatsoever, thinking I was helping someone who seemed to need it, when the reality was that one false move and I wouldn't be here telling it. This all happened when I was 8 years old, along with my twin sister and my mom. We were on vacation in California and were staying in a small hostel near the beach. Everything seemed quiet until one morning we ran into a guy in the hallway who kept staring at my sister and me. A curious detail is that my sister and I were always dressed alike and with our long dark hair down, which made us look much more alike. It was normal that we attracted attention wherever we went. After all, people have a certain fascination for twins, and we were already quite used to being the center of attention wherever we went. But this case was different. The guy was a stocky man of Middle Eastern descent. We knew this because he was dressed in characteristic Arab garb. As soon as the man saw us, he stopped what he was doing to glance us up and down, and there was a weird, scruffy grin on his face. My sister and I looked at each other, feeling equally uneasy, but my mom didn't even pay attention to this because she was already used to meeting weird guys. That morning we headed to a supermarket that was very close to our hostel, but when we were doing our shopping with complete normality, I had a strange feeling, that feeling you get when someone is looking at you, so I turned to where I thought the person looking at me was, which was just down the aisle we were in, and there he was, the guy from the hostel, looking at us again with those piercing eyes. I nudged my sister to turn around and see him, and as she did, she got nervous too, and the way this man was looking at us was too uncomfortable to just ignore. As we were about to turn into a different aisle, Amy, my sister, and I noticed the guy approaching with his cart, and as soon as we exchanged glances for the first time, he suddenly focused on a table with fruit nearby. This caught our attention more than if he had just walked on by. Although my mom was still going about her shopping as if it was nothing and hadn't even noticed what was going on with the weird guy, my sister and I exchanged nervous glances as we kept looking back. Every time we entered a new aisle, we would discover him at the end of it, looking at us strangely again, and from a distance he seemed to be breathing in a ragged way, like faster and heavier than he should. At one point I noticed his cart and realized it was almost empty, except for a few loaves of bread he had grabbed the first time we saw him in the supermarket. That's when we finally told our mom, but she just rolled her eyes at us, saying she probably thought we were following him because of our fixation on him. Suddenly, the man disappeared when we got to the end of the last aisle, and we didn't see him for a while. Amy and I had already forgotten all about him by the time we headed to the checkout, but already upon arrival, my sister asked my mom for a chocolate bar, to which she, rather annoyed, replied that we didn't have money for that, and that she had already bought us ice cream and cookies. We both started pouting, and seeing that we were making a scene, my mom threw out a threat about leaving us there alone as she started putting things on the tape of the box. Just then, my sister and I noticed my mom suddenly turn around and her expression totally changed. When we turned around, we saw that less than a foot behind us was the same guy, who now seemed to be sweating like crazy. We approached our mom as the man let out an awkward laugh and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, I didn't mean to scare these girls. They are so beautiful. Are they your daughters?" My mom guffawed and said, "Yes, they are mine." But then the guy put that awkward smile back on and said, "I couldn't help but notice that you don't seem to have the money for what they want. How old are they, and so are you? I can help you. I have plenty of money and I can." My mother's face became a mess of confusion and anger, and she shouted "Excuse me" at him as if it was a joke. But he insisted, "I'm serious. How much?" My mom looked at him with an almost exaggerated look of disbelief on her face. Amy and I didn't quite understand what was going on up to that point. We didn't understand my mom's reaction until the guy blatantly said, "How much? How much do you want for the girls? Ask me any amount you want. I'd love to keep both of them and even you, but if you want, you can leave me just one. I can make it work. I'll give you the money. Just tell me how much and it's yours. I'll give you whatever you want." As the guy said this, he nervously wiped his forehead with a handkerchief and looked at us with a creepy smile. My mother was shocked for a moment. Her eyes were wide open and her expression was somewhere between astonishment, indignation, and bewilderment. She didn't answer him, just stared at us and said, "Behind me now." So we obediently fell in behind her. The cashier, who was a teenager who couldn't have been more than 18, was completely shocked, looking at us with eyes like saucers as he kept scanning our stuff, and once we were behind my mom, she said to the guy, "Listen to me good, you sick'em. If you come near my daughters, I will gouge your eyes out through your nose and then shove them down your throat. Do you hear me?" Those were strong words coming from someone who was 5 feet tall, but his tone was so threatening that the man became serious, and without buying anything or saying another half word, he turned and walked out of the establishment. But he didn't go far. The front of the place was glass, so a moment later we saw him pressing his face against the glass, leaving a trail of sweat as he tried to see us. At that point, the cashier got really scared and went to alert the manager, asking him to call the police, but already my mom was calling 911. The guy finally peeled off the vidrio and walked towards the hostel, but we stayed inside the supermarket until we saw the patrol cars approaching. The cops apprehended the guy and placed him under arrest, then took our statements and witness statements. I never really knew what happened to the man because that same day we returned home. We still had a day to go, but after that, my mom decided to move up our trip back to Pittsburgh. I really hope that creepy guy never manages to convince anyone to do something so horrible. My family and I didn't have a very happy life. We moved every year, sometimes even several times a year. My stepfather had a serious alcohol problem, and my mother was dealing with her own drug problems and prescription medications. This story takes place after we moved from Tampa to Winslow, Arizona. I was between 9 and 10 years old at the time, and I never quite understood why we moved around so much. I really hated that instability, because I was barely adjusting to a new place when we had to move somewhere else. At that time, my mom told me that we would go there to visit her stepfather, with whom we ended up staying for a few months. But after a while, we left again because of the violence in that place. We were a family of 6, and eventually spent the rest of our time in Arizona bouncing from room to room in cheap motels. My parents had a strict rule. We kids, which was my 3 brothers and me, couldn't stay in the room during the day. Even though it was about 100 degrees outside almost every day, we had no choice but to be outside, even to eat, and with very few bathroom breaks. So we spent most of our time seeing if the soda machines were open or just roasting in the sun until they let us go to sleep. If we were lucky, sometimes there would be another kid in the motel playing with us. One of the girls who was around a little longer was named Daisy and was about my age. She was kind of annoying, but I appreciated having company, other than my brothers. Often I would knock on her bedroom door to ask her dad if she could come out and play with me. And on the day this story happened, my brothers and stepdad went out, so I was left alone outside. I was already a little bored that afternoon, so after a while of being bored, I decided to go find Daisy to play with her. I walked across the dry parking lot toward the room she shared with her father, but as I approached, I noticed the window curtains moving, as if someone was watching me. I stopped just as I reached the curb in front of Daisy's room and waited a moment thinking it was her coming out to greet me, but when the door opened, no one came out. Nervously, I called out Daisy's name, waiting for her to peek out, and after a few moments, someone appeared. But it wasn't her. It was a tall woman with faded red hair, tangled and messy. Her eyes were a deep blue and stared at me. Her quick approach startled me, but just as I decided to turn and run, I felt a strong grip on my waist. I froze, shocked that a stranger was holding me, and when our eyes met again, she smiled, flashing a smile somewhere between haunting and sad. "I know you. I know who you are. You are a star. I know you. I know your destiny. You are a star. You are the destined child. I can show you." The woman repeated this without blinking, as she began to pull me toward the room I had come from. I tried every which way to break free, but her grip was too strong and panic began to take hold of me. I started screaming, hoping someone would hear me and come to my rescue, but she only pulled me closer to her room. Suddenly, just as I was about to enter the room, she tripped over a small overfloor in the doorway and suddenly let go of me. As soon as I touched the floor, I seized the moment to escape, but she recovered quickly and this time grabbed my ankle, making me fall face first on the floor. I tried to scream and move, but her hands wouldn't let me. She grabbed my other ankle very tightly and I realized I was trapped. I looked towards my family's room, terrified and unable to think. Then I just cried very loudly, calling for my mom, hoping she could hear me from inside, but she couldn't. I remember pleading several times for her to let me go, but it was no use. Suddenly I felt the pavement rubbing against my stomach and I realized I was being dragged even further away. That feeling of despair overwhelmed me and I closed in on myself, mentally giving up. That's when I heard a man's voice behind me. "Hey, what are you doing?" The woman's grip loosened and in that instant I was able to kick her and knock her down and finally free myself. I rolled over onto my back and sat still, and then watched as Daisy's dad came running out of the room the woman was in, trying to comfort me and reassuring me that everything was okay. I was so confused that I don't even remember what he said to me, only that he was begging me not to tell anyone what had happened. Then he took the woman away, pushing her back to her room, and I ran to my room where I found my mom sitting, watching TV. I told her everything that had happened and she stormed out after them. This is where my memory becomes a mess. I was terrified and then someone called the police. I looked out our bedroom window and saw the woman in the backseat of a patrol car, driving away. Our eyes met and she started banging against the window, screaming. Although I couldn't hear her, I knew she was trying to tell me again that she knew me. I don't know what was wrong with her, but she was definitely not well. This happened about 14 years ago when I was about 20. My cousin offered me a job at his uncle's glass shop where they mainly installed huge windows in tall buildings, something that doesn't have much to do with the story I'm about to tell you, but I thought it was interesting to mention. At that time, I had temporarily moved to Jacksonville, Florida from Tampa. My cousin lived in Alabama, and I really wanted to go visit him and stay with them for a while. This was my first long road trip and my first time away from my family. At the time, I was driving an old Ford Taurus that could barely handle errands, but as an indestructible young man, I didn't worry about that. I was just excited to get out into the world and didn't think about the dangers. My parents tried to help me plan and pack better for the trip, knowing there could be problems, but I didn't think it would be that complicated. It's not like I was going to be on the road for days either, and there's always fast food on the way, so I wasn't stressed. Still, they insisted I bring food, water, and an emergency kit, but I told them it wasn't the 1930s, there were gas stations at every exit, and I had a cell phone in any case. I thought, what could happen on a couple of interstate highways? I wasn't going very far without a signal. So, moving on to the trip, as a good Florida boy, I had no idea that it could get so cold in Alabama, nor did I know that the heater in my car didn't work. At first I didn't need it, but the truth is that I arrived in Alabama very tired and stopped many more times than I expected. I still had a few hours to go and the freezing air kept me awake. Finally, I got out to the interstate and started to go through some smaller roads. There, the roads didn't have names like in Florida, only numbers, which seemed strange to me, but I didn't give it that much importance until it was important. After a while, the GPS started to send me through gravel roads, and as I turned off on a newly paved road, the cold started to freeze my bones and made me feel very hungry too. So I started to remember my parents' words about packing food. I should have listened to my intuition. The weirdest thing about MapQuest was that you only had printed directions, so I didn't have a map to fall back on. Going off your route in search of fast food was like playing hide and seek in a maze, so of course I lost count of how many times I got sidetracked. I just wanted to find something nearby where I could stop without getting complicated, but most of all without getting lost again. Just when I was beginning to think I would never find anything, I saw a small country grocery store next to an old motel on my right. The motel appeared to be closed, but I thought the store was not. It had no name, it just said grocery store on some sort of worn sign, but I went in because a light was shining, and I thought maybe it was open. But realizing that almost all the interior lights were out, I got a little scared. However, hunger can be powerful, so I stopped and opened the door without much thought. As I stepped inside, I saw a shadow move in the background between the aisles. Surprisingly, the door opened without a sound, which made me think that maybe they were closing, and I imagined the owner being sympathetic to a weary traveler. "Hello, is anyone here?" I got no response, so I tried again, a little louder. "I came to check if you're still open." But nothing. I figured the owner was a little older or something, so I wandered into the store. Truth be told, it smelled a little funny, and I despaired because I just wanted some fries or whatever to kill the hunger I had. Suddenly, a guy came out from the back. "Oh, I'm sorry, we were just about to close. How can I help you?" he said to me with a smile. He took me by surprise, but he seemed friendly. Not the old guy I had imagined, more like a young guy, maybe in his 30s. I told him I was coming from Florida and that it had been quite a long trip and I was kind of hungry. "I was hoping to find something to eat," I said. "Oh, we have a lot of stuff, what do you want?" But this guy had a weird vibe, like he was scanning me, and for some reason his words didn't sound real. I mean, I could feel like he was telling me things in a way that was more malicious than kind. His gaze was fixed, which made me a little nervous. And even though he was smiling broadly, his eyes weren't moving. I could only guess his excitement by how his lips were moving, and that made me feel very uncomfortable. His expression didn't change at all. Normally, when someone smiles, it shows all over their face, but this guy didn't. It was just weird. I told him anyway that I just wanted some chips and maybe a Coke. "Do you have Doritos?" I asked, half expecting the guy to take care of me quickly so I could get the hell out of there as soon as possible. But he only moved closer, closing the door behind me before turning around with an unsettling smile. "I don't want anyone else to come in," he blurted out with a chuckle. Although his tone was friendly, I found the situation a little creepy, but I ignored him because I wanted a snack. "Follow me," he said as he headed to the back of the store. I already knew it wasn't normal for a store owner to give a customer a tour, but I had lived a pretty sheltered life and didn't want to seem rude. As we went along, I sensed that something wasn't right, but I didn't want to ask awkward questions like, "Why does it smell like that?" for example. As we reached the back area, the guy lifted the plastic curtains that separate customers from the back of the store. "This way," he said as he led the way. The alarms in my head started going off loudly at that point. He seemed to be watching around him as if he was trying to make sure no one was hanging around. Is this safe?" I asked, backing up a bit. Then I saw the fries next to me. He noticed me looking and said, "Yeah, we have all the good stuff here," winking at me. Then I could see the source of the bad smell I had noticed since I walked in. There were bags of meat on a dimly lit shelf, and that puzzling find made me wonder, why were those bags there decomposing instead of in a refrigerator? "I'm gonna take these, okay?" I replied nervously as I grabbed a bag off the shelf and started backing toward the door. "No, wait, I have much better stuff back here," he insisted as he gestured for me to come back. I tried to dissemble, checking my pockets and pretending as if I remembered something. "Oh wait, I think I forgot my wallet in the car. I'll be right back," I stammered, and turned around, stumbling a bit. I sped toward the exit, reaching the door and turning the lock a couple of times until I heard a click. As I pushed the door open, I looked back, but the guy had disappeared. What the hell, I thought, feeling quite scared now. It was clear that something weird was going on there and that this guy was up to something. I immediately jumped into my car and sped out of that store, not looking back until I reached my cousin's house. Fortunately, I managed to bring the bag of potato chips with me, and that was all I ate for the rest of the drive. Truly, this was one of the strangest and creepiest experiences of my life. I'm 22 years old and still a virgin, which frustrates me quite a bit from time to time. A couple of months ago, I decided it was time to change that, and I took the plunge and sought the services of a call girl. Prostitution is legal in my country, so I wasn't doing anything outside the law. While I was looking for options, I found a blonde Russian girl in her 20s on an escort website and decided to meet her a couple of days later. She was a bit terse and spoke almost emotionlessly, but I figured that was par for the course in her line of work. If I had to deal with desperate guys all day long, it would probably be like that too. I took a break from work that day and drove to the nearest town, which is pretty big. I live in a small college town where there aren't many options, so this was the best I could do. It took me a 2-hour train ride to get to this place that I didn't know very well. To top it off, the girl told me she would send me the exact address of the place where we would meet a couple of hours before our date. And I didn't understand why, but I didn't ask questions. So there I was, in this big city, feeling a bit lost. Almost 2 hours before our meeting, I noticed that my cell phone was about to die, so I sent her a desperate text asking for the address as I needed to know if she still wanted to meet. I turned the phone off and restarted it every 10 minutes, waiting to see her response. In the end, he sent me the address, which luckily wasn't that far from the train station. I started walking towards the place, checking Google Maps at every corner, and after about 10 minutes I got to where my phone said, but I had no idea where to go from there. There was a turn that led to an alley and an apartment building, so I figured I should go in that direction. Truthfully, I didn't know what to expect. I was starting to feel pretty weird at that point. Anxiety was getting the better of me, and I knew I was totally unprepared for this. There was still 40 minutes until our date, so I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood before doing anything else, a bit to calm my nerves. Come to think of it, I must have looked like some kind of crazy person, running around the place in circles, as if I had just escaped from a horror movie. In the end, I texted the girl, and she instructed me to go to a motel, a place that was at the end of the alley after another left turn. I was a little relieved to at least have an address. I'm a student, and my budget doesn't include luxuries, so I sent her a quick text apologizing for the misunderstanding and making it clear that I didn't have extra money for a motel. But she surprised me. She told me that the room was already included in the price of her services. "Oh, great," I said. So I made the extra turn around the corner she indicated, and there it was, a 2-story motel tucked between other buildings. It looked like a weird place, like it shouldn't be there. Even though I felt increasingly uncomfortable, I approached the entrance even though I was already getting frustrated. All I wanted was to find someone to discreetly help me through this very important step in my life, and now it seemed I had to deal with a place that felt like a real slum. The door was open and there was a counter, but it wasn't the most welcoming place to enter. I told the girl about my day, my doubts, but she insisted that I just wait. Then, out of nowhere, A guy appeared leading a much younger-looking girl to a room. At first, I thought they were family, but they had nothing in common. When I asked the girl at the counter for a room, I noticed that her expression was strange. She looked nervous, skeletal, and clearly not at her best. I could tell that something was not right there. And as my panic grew, I realized that I didn't feel safe at all. I'm not used to feeling threatened. I mean, I'm a strong guy, but that situation was different. The reason I'm still a virgin is that I'm not very social, although it's weird to say. The girl at the desk told me that all the rooms were occupied, and I was about to leave when within 5 minutes I got another text message from the girl I was going to meet, which said that I was now on the 2nd floor and that I should knock on a door. So I did. I entered the building and noticed that the man I had seen earlier was gone, and no one seemed to be there. My initial impression was that the place felt incredibly empty and cold. I climbed the stairs with some hesitation as I observed the odd pattern of bright colors on the walls. The atmosphere was eerie and the silence was total. If all the rooms really were occupied, then that group of customers must have been very quiet. I knocked on the door, and honestly, it seemed to take forever for them to open. I heard noise from the other side, like they were getting ready for something, but finally the door opened, and to my surprise, it wasn't the attractive Russian girl I'd been talking to. Instead, I found an older woman, at least 50 years old, with wrinkled skin and dark circles under her eyes. Before I even processed what was going on, I had already crossed the threshold and the door closed behind me in an instant. My instinct telling me I had to get out of there as the woman looked at me with a vacant expression, trying to lure me into the room with a very strange kindness. Instead of playing dumb and staying there, I tried to find a way out immediately. I don't remember my words exactly, but I told him I needed to leave for a moment, promising to be back in a moment. I noticed that she was barely articulating in her language, so I tried to calm her down with a gesture and pointed to the door, saying, 5 minutes. Then I left without waiting for a response. I ran down the stairs almost running, and as I reached the 2nd floor, out of nowhere, the scrawny guy from before appeared behind me and asked me if I had had any luck finding my date. Without stopping, I grabbed the door handle and blurted out that I hadn't gotten anywhere, and bolted out of there feeling like I had just escaped a nightmare. I sent another message to the girl to clarify that I had had a big misunderstanding, and I wasn't going to let them rip me off. I expected a threatening reply, something like, "You have to pay or my guys will do this or that." But to my surprise, I got nothing. Reflecting on it, I don't know what I got myself into that day. Maybe it wasn't so shady after all. I had just run into a scammer. So here's my advice. If you're thinking of ordering adult services, make sure you pay a reasonable price and stay away from those motels. That night, I walked out of my room in that rundown motel where I was going to spend the night before heading back on the road the next morning. A gust of air hit my face, and from the first instant I felt that something in the atmosphere had changed, and a dry discomfort settled in my throat. I gave my chest a couple of soft thumps to dismiss it and let out a cough that sounded a little choking. My God, I thought as I tried to open the door. I remembered what the owner had told me about the lock, and after a moment of concentration, I stuck my finger just under the hinge and pulled upward. The lock moved, giving me the space I needed to get the key in. I turned it and heard a click. Then I felt the wind was there, as if reminding me that I wasn't going anywhere. I slowly pulled the key out, and hearing another key jangle suddenly, I turned to the neighboring rooms. I immediately fixed my eyes on the door, where the sound was apparently coming from, and waited for the click that would confirm what I thought. Suddenly, a hoarse voice came in, full of frustration, and said, "What the hell is wrong with these doors?" I looked away quickly, trying not to look like a busybody, and prepared to go out and buy a soda to soothe my throat. The light from the little coffee shop across the street was shining like a beacon, so I started walking toward it. "Hey lady, wait up!" I heard the same guy calling out to me. I assumed it was another guest, just like me, and surely he wanted to ask me something. As I turned around, I felt the wind intensify, and in my head, a strange feeling warned me that something wasn't right. It seemed like a starless storm was forming in the sky. Suddenly, I felt a shiver run through my whole body. Thank God I didn't have to drive in that situation. "Why are you trying to open those doors?" he asked me, approaching with concern. "No, I don't know. I'm just a guest like you." I let out a smile as politely as I could, even though his presence was making me a little uncomfortable. He was a dark-skinned, athletic man with a rather intimidating presence. His long hair fell over his shoulders, and all of that was in stark contrast to me, who was just a small, thin, middle-aged white woman. I tried to calm down, but a strange fear ran through me even though he hadn't done or said anything wrong. He was just there, just like me. The man came a step closer, and for an instant I perceived a very strange smell coming from him. Something unpleasant. I thought about asking him, but I mentally pushed the idea away, knowing that he might think I was being racist. I thought he might misunderstand me, and I didn't want that. But that stench grew stronger and came over me, causing me to do a slight turn and walk away from him. "What the hell?" he said when I turned away, and that made me uncomfortable. His expression was serious, and I recognized that something wasn't right with him because his eyes kept looking at me with an unsettling expression, as if he was sizing me up. He just stood there in front of me, looking at me in that creepy way. "Do I know you?" I questioned him, and his answer paralyzed me. "No, but you saw me, and now I have to kill you." At that moment, everything around me seemed to crumble. The atmosphere felt dark and desolate. Then I saw him pull a knife from his belt. The blade was stained, and I assumed it was blood. I gasped. The atmosphere was so thick that I could feel as if an invisible force was pulling me towards him, trapping me on the ground. The knot in my stomach rose in my throat, and suddenly, I threw up everything. My quick reaction bought me some time, because I noticed him hesitate for a moment, and the bitter taste of my own vomit brought me back to the reality of the imminent danger in front of me. Every fiber of my being was alert to the threat. Without thinking, I turned and bolted for the motel lobby, but he immediately began to chase after me. The cool night air felt colder as I tried to get away from that man, and I felt the wind hit me in the face as my panic increased. "Help me!" I screamed as I ran, but he was getting closer and closer. "I'll cut your throat, bitch. You've seen it all, don't try to fool me," he was muttering like a ghost in my ear. He was getting so close I could feel his hot breath on my neck, so I ran faster than my feet could as I cried desperately, and my tears were blown away by the wind before they could fall at all. "Please help me," I pleaded, but in my terror perhaps those words made him angrier. He was looking for his moment, and as soon as I uttered that plea, I felt a sharp pain in my back. I doubled over, falling to the ground, and when I turned around, there he was, knife held high, now dripping blood. "All women deserve to die," he spat at me, and his eyes were full of hatred. At that moment, the blood on the knife and the stabbing pain I felt in my back let me know that he had stabbed me, but judging by his expression, he still wasn't satisfied. It all happened in a second. I felt my life fading away. He moved the knife, ready to stab me again. Then almost with my last strength, I screamed, "Help me, please!" Completely terrified, lying on the motel floor, looking at that stormy sky that showed no stars. I wondered how a life could end so quickly. Once again, I screamed as I watched the knife fall toward me. Suddenly, a shot rang through the air, and the guy grabbed his chest and fell backwards, stunned. I froze, barely able to breathe. "Damn it!" he screamed, and his words faded away as he fell to the ground. At that moment, I heard hurried footsteps, and when I turned around, I saw the motel owner running toward me, a worried expression on his face and a gun in his hand. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked as he looked at the man he had just knocked down. I nodded my head gratefully. "Thanks, really," I managed to mumble when I was finally able to speak. "It's nothing. By God, this guy almost killed you," he replied, relieved. "But you'll need first aid for that wound." he added thoughtfully as he took my hand and guided me to safety. The guy he shot was left lying on the ground. I was sure he was dead, and this was confirmed by the police when they arrived a few minutes later. An ambulance also arrived, and I was taken to the nearest hospital where I was given first aid, and fortunately the knife had not punctured any major organs, so I only needed stitches and antibiotics. It turned out that the man who attacked me had stabbed his girlfriend to death in the room I saw him come out of. That was the reason he came after me. He wanted to silence me because he thought I had seen everything and would call the police. Without a doubt, that was the most terrifying event of my whole life. I was really convinced that I was going to die, but fortunately, an angel saved me at the last minute.